Good afternoon and welcome everybody. We're just going to take a minute to allow other guests to join us. So we're just going to give it 60 seconds and then we'll be back with you. Okay, welcome everybody. I hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. We're here today for the 5th of the School of Sustainable Food and Farming's webinars. And today we've got a special guest from NFU Energy, who I will introduce very shortly. But I wanted to say a big thank you to everybody for joining us today. We hope you find this session useful. So I just wanted to give you a very quick introduction to those of you who aren't familiar with the School of Sustainable Food and Farming. So we were a partnership organisation based at Harper Adams University in Shropshire, together with Morrison Supermarkets, McDonald's restaurants, and the NFU approximately 18 months ago. And our aim is to enable, inspire, and educate farmers to achieve net zero within a sustainable food system. We've got Jon Swain here with us today, who is Technical Director at NFU Energy. And Jon will present his presentation to you shortly. I wanted to make you aware that this session will be taking questions at the very end. So do please put your questions into the chat function on this webinar, and we will share those questions with Jon at the very end. So Jon, Technical Director from the NFU, it's over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Alex, for that introduction. I'll just start by putting my screen up online, and hopefully that will all work and the technology will be perfectly fine. If it's not, then someone I'm sure will shout up. So yes, as Alex said, I'm Technical Director here at NFU Energy. I've been an energy consultant within the agricultural sector for about 18 years or so now, and seen some pretty big sweeping changes in the way that we think about energy, specifically in the way that we have developed and taken on board the world of renewable energy, which, let's be honest, 18 years ago was pretty much nowhere. Where solar panel costs were many multiples of thousands of pounds a kilowatt to the cost today, which is in the sort of high hundreds of pounds a kilowatt, and everything in between, through the worlds of compliance schemes, the carrot and the stick approach, and really it's been a fun ride, and in a lot of ways a lot of the changes that we've seen in the last 18 months sort of epitomise where we've been in the last 18 years. And as an energy consultant, I don't think I've been asked more in the last 18 months really about how to reduce your energy costs. With the costs the way that they've been, especially in the sort of latter part of the summer last year, the very high energy costs that sort of scared the government into action and made us all concerned about the future of our businesses. Energy has become really at the forefront of people's minds. But really, the messaging is not very dissimilar now to how it always used to be. The pathway to reducing energy costs is pretty much this, all the way from measuring and understanding why, where, how, what you're using energy for, all the way through to doing something about it by reducing your own consumption, finding other ways to generate energy for yourself, or diversifying into other energy schemes that maybe sort of substitute that income, substitute that cost. This journey is the same journey that I've been talking about for many years, and is a journey that if you are interested in reducing your energy costs, that you need to take really seriously, especially the bits on the left-hand side there. How you measure and understand what you're using energy for and why you're using energy is really the key to making sure that you make the best investments and you make the right decisions in terms of reducing your costs and investing in renewable energy going forwards. There will be a few graphs in this slide. I make no apology for them. It is a very data-driven world, the world of energy, and I will try and talk you through most of these as we go through, but don't be worried particularly about the facts and the figures that these graphs show. More the trends and the understanding of what's been happening is the important message to take away. We call it an energy price roller coaster. And we call it a roller coaster because, as you can see, it goes up and it comes back down again. And I think many people felt sort of the summer last year, sort of mid-August time, that energy prices were never going to stop rising, that they were going to carry on going up and up and up and up and up. And this was really going to affect all of our businesses. But come back down they did. And we can see this effect in this graph here, and we can see how sort of since the heady heights of that summer period last year, we've been on a bit of a downward slide in terms of energy costs ever since then. So for nearly 12 months or so now, our energy costs have been coming down and down and down. And at the moment, those trends are set to continue. And there are some people within the market that think that July is going to be the bottoming out of the market. You can see in this price curve here that we are clearly sort of flattening out our energy costs as we go forward through sort of the early summer period. But of course, it is this very high peak in August last year that scared everybody into taking some action and taking energy costs really seriously. And yeah, we can look at that in a different lens as well. We sort of compare year on year, and we can see how the 2022 year, which is the line above all the others, really is sort of the highest point of energy costs for the last 5 or 6 years going forward, and in some cases the highest energy costs for history. You can also see the sort of green line coming in 2023, coming in at a much lower level than 2022. And of course, that gives us a bit of a sense of relief, and everyone goes, oh yes, we got through the worst of it, didn't we? But the fact is that energy costs are still higher now than they have been for many years previously. And so we shouldn't just sort of accept that things are better and we're all going to be okay. This is still something that we need to take really seriously and make sure that we protect ourselves from these higher prices going forward. I guess the question is, amongst what are we going to do, is what's going on? And the fact is, nearly all of these things, in fact, all of these things and many others, have an effect on the price that you're paying for your energy, whether it's gas or whether it's electricity. And uncertainty is that word in the middle, and it's that uncertainty that breeds the big sweeping volatility in prices, as people are unsure as to what they're going to be paying for energy, or whether they're going to be able to obtain the energy that they need for their business, or to match the demand on the wholesale market. But coupled with that, we've got the drive towards net zero. We've got carbon prices as other European countries drive towards net zero. We've got a bit of a Brexit effect. We've got how much energy storage that we have. We've got a milder winter or a harsher winter. We've got demand as various other economies open up post-COVID, and they, especially the Asian economies, they start to increase their purchases of gas. We've got our interconnectivities to pay for. We've got a dwindling nuclear fleet onshore, and we've got sort of nuclear uncertainties in other parts of the European economy. And all of these drive towards what's happening in the energy prices and whether it's going to be high or low today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. And as you might expect, some things are pretty obvious. The Russian-Ukrainian crisis really caused that a concern that there wasn't going to be enough gas to go around for the winter in sort of late summer, early autumn last year, and that's what really drove that high price at that particular point in time. And of course, we're looking at it again right now as the conflict maybe starts to heat up again a little bit, and also maybe a new conflict comes on board. And those two are probably the most dominant driving forces between the uncertainty and the volatility of prices at this moment in time. Coupled with that, of course, we are trying to drive towards net zero. And if we're trying to drive towards net zero, then we're trying to drive towards using non-fossil fuel-based energy sources. And if we're going to use non-fossil fuel-based energy sources, we're going to use renewables, then their chances are that they're going to be more expensive than our traditional sources of fuel. So all of this drive towards net zero will also help to keep the prices at a higher level, albeit hopefully we're buying more decarbonised energy than we ever have done before. And at this point, of course, everyone asks me what are prices going to do. So I drag out my crystal ball, and this is a graph that I put in front of the Low Carbon Agri Show back in March. And in fact, I sort of had a stab at what prices might be going forward. And we're talking about electricity here. We're talking in pence per kilowatt hour. And along the bottom, we've got different periods in time. So we've clearly passed February to March 23, and indeed Q2 23. We're now to sort of summer 23, winter 23, summer 24 and winter 24 prices. And these are sort of the predictions that a lot of analysts are making, and what the sort of future price trends were showing in terms of what you might be paying for your electricity going forward. And in fact, as we can see right at this moment in time, some people were paying as little as, dare I say it, 28 pence per kilowatt hour at the end of last month for their energy, particularly on the commodity-based market. Which is a good result in a lot of people's books, because it's a lot better than the 50p to a pound that people were being charged back in sort of autumn, winter last year. But still, we're talking maybe double or even sometimes 3 times what we've been used to paying in the past. And again, just to look at these, what's going on. We've talked about why we've had record high prices, the Ukrainian conflict, the French nuclear fleet, but also problems with getting electricity from Norway because they've had a bit of a water shortage. But things weren't as bad as we were expecting because we'd had pretty much a mild autumn and there wasn't enough gas kicking around in the system. And that's helped to bring those prices down to the level at which people are starting to find a little bit more palatable. To the point at which now we're also starting to export power to Europe, and we've been exporting power to Europe via our interconnectors regularly. And in the latter part of last year, we were exporting quite a lot of energy to Europe. Throughout the winter, we tend to be a net importer, and then it sort of swings back around the other way as we go through early summer. And so, yes, we can see that in our marketplace, and we help people out just as much as they help us out. So whilst we might have gone through a Brexit sort of split, we are also still connected to Europe electrically and via our gas pipelines. So we're not alone in terms of suffering from these exposures to very high prices that we've seen on the marketplace. You forgive me really for talking about electricity as a dominant fuel. 2 reasons for that. Quite often, the agricultural marketplace isn't gas connected. There are some sections of agriculture that are, such as controlled environment horticulture, big gas consumers. But mostly, we all have an electricity supply. And if you believe sort of some of the things that get put out there, the future is going to be electrically dominant. We're going to get most of our heating from electricity via heat pumps or some other mechanism. We're going to be using electricity to drive our transport fleet, and clearly we're going to use electricity to run our businesses as well. So electricity becomes really the most sort of dominant fuel of choice. And here we have an example of the national grid's projection of how much electricity we're going to use. It's almost like a sort of doubling of our current energy consumption. Our current electricity consumption is going to be doubled as we go forward. So think about electricity, and think about electricity seriously in your own businesses as an area both to concentrate on in terms of energy efficiency, but also how you might substitute your other heating systems fuels with electricity, and how you might get that electricity, where you might source that from going forward. Yeah. We need to talk about opportunities. What opportunities are there to reduce your energy cost? So if you think back to that journey that I put up right at the very first slide, once we've measured and understand where we've used it, we need to start thinking about how we reduce what we consume, how we do more with less energy consumption. Then we need to think about how do we might self-generate, what we might install to substitute our own energy consumption, the bits that we can't avoid, and maybe that'll be through non-renewable energy if we've gone down combined heat and power using gas, natural gas as an input fuel in a more efficient way, or whether we go down a renewable energy system, maybe solar PV, or a heat pump or some other form of renewable energy system that sort of takes the load off our current requirement from the fossil fuel sources. And then maybe we think about other industrial partnerships, other sort of creative thinkings, other things that we could do that we may be able to link up someone else's waste heat source with our heat requirement, things like that, to try and reduce both parties' exposure to energy costs. This is something that, as I say, government has been taking seriously, and it's something that the government sort of tackled in its Farm to Fork summit that you might have heard us talk about sort of mid-May last month. And we can just pick out some of the things that they talked about in terms of support for agricultural sectors, specifically controlled environment horticulture, so that's protected cropping, growing things under glass or polytunnels. An area of agriculture that sometimes gets a little bit forgotten in terms of policy, being lumped in with general agriculture, but very exposed to energy costs. Heating glass houses isn't a particularly cheap thing to do. We're going to look at that more intensively, or the government is committed to looking at that in terms of how it might support that sector, in terms of research funding, in terms of how we might use some waste heat, how we might use some waste heat to support the growing of crops. Similarly, agriculture more generally is going to get some attention. We've also already got the energy bill discount scheme following on from the energy bill relief scheme. We may be getting more grant funding for some solar and hopefully solar and batteries, and some investigation into some of the grid issues that are going on, because there's nothing really that stops a renewable project in its tracks faster than the inability to connect to the grid. And as we put more and more distributed generation onto the network, the more and more difficult that becomes to find ways to connect. Just thinking again about net zero, energy is an easy target to reduce emissions. Agricultural's emissions aren't really dominated by energy at all. Only sort of 10% of agricultural's emissions are energy related, but it is an easy target. It's something that you can do something about. And depending on which sector that you're in, you may be looking at heating fuels for horticulture, poultry, grain drying. You may be thinking more particularly about electricity for your dairy pigs or crop storage. But it's about what you use, why you use it, and how you use it that starts to become the target for you and your business. So what is energy efficiency? This is how we start to make inroads into that energy cost. And put simply, it is the relationship between what we're getting usefully out and the energy that we're putting in to drive that process. And the smaller we can make the losses, the greater we can make the work out for a reduced energy input, the more efficient that process is. So looking at something more akin to something you might have seen, Here is a boiler, a large gas boiler. If we want a megawatt of heat out, 1,000 kilowatts of heat out, and it's 85% efficient, then we have to put in 1176 kilowatts of gas into it, and we lose 176 kilowatts in terms of the shell losses or up the flue. Or thinking more about a pump in terms of an electrically driven system, if we've got a 10 kilowatt pump and it's 95% efficient, then we're going to get 9.5 kilowatts of useful work out and lose half a kilowatt out as heat, and sort of friction losses and so on. And the point is here really to reduce as much of those losses as you possibly can at both the prime mover end and also in the transmission and the movement of that energy around your system, as much as you possibly can. The energy efficiency principles are relatively straightforward and easy. Do more with less. Number one, switch things off. It's really effective as an energy efficiency technique. Turning things off, not using the energy at all, will reduce your energy consumption instantly. However, it won't get the job done. And if it's not getting the job done, then it might be the most efficient thing you've done, but actually you're not doing what you really set out to do and your business doesn't continue. So there are areas that you can do a switch off campaign, things that are left on unnecessarily. Lights are always a good target for that. Heated areas, mess rooms, canteens and the like, where people are in there at break time and leave, but leave the heater still running. All of those places, a switch off campaign can be quite effective, but you're unlikely to be able to turn off your prime movers in terms of your business processes. So we need to think about the two other things, which are reducing the load or reducing the time. Energy is a function of load and time. Kilowatts times hours equals kilowatt hours. And so we've got to find ways of reducing the kilowatt load, such as insulating things or using more efficient motors, using more efficient drives, and finding other ways of doing things. Or we do things faster. We do things in a different way. We make the process slicker to reduce the time element of our energy consumption. And so, those really are our three strategies. Switch things off when we don't need them. Reduce the load. Find ways of minimizing the consumption or the immediate consumption, or reduce the time-based element of the energy requirement. If you don't know what you're doing, then it's really difficult to work out where you may be able to improve. So, energy efficiency is all about understanding the data in the first place. Improving your metering, putting in new sensors to work out where it is you're using energy and why you're using it is one of the big first steps. An energy meter, even a simple kilowatt hour meter, will tell you a lot. A kilowatt hour meter that can tell you when it was consumed, not just how much was consumed over a period of time, but it can give you half-hourly data, or even better 5-minute data, or even better pinpoint towards the particular machine or the location that the energy is consumed, will give you so much invaluable data that you'll then be able to benchmark against what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that you can make the adjustments and you can make the upgrades that you need to reduce your energy consumption. One of the big things, of course, in energy efficiency is training, behavioral changes. So much of this is reliant on people adhering to good practice, be they yourself, be they your employees, be they your family, be they people who are occasionally coming into your site. If they exhibit poor behaviors in terms of energy efficiency, then you can have the best efficient equipment you like, but if it's left running unnecessarily, or people don't know how to use it properly, then the chances are it won't maintain its efficiency. So don't underestimate training and behavioral change. So just sort of laboring on that point, reducing your power consumption, being smaller or more efficient about things, reducing the time, set points, changing the temperature over which things heat to, putting in sensors to make sure that things turn off automatically, talking to your staff, talking to your customers about how they might help you reduce the time-based element of your consumption. Finding other ways to use different fuels, and paying less, of course. It's not a more efficient thing to do, but of course that is a way of reducing your energy cost. So think of it in terms of that triangle. Think of it in terms of that journey that I put up front at the beginning. I guess it's always tempting to focus on the largest energy piece of equipment first, but often I quite say focus on the largest energy use first. And of course, if you haven't measured it, then you don't know what that is. But the temptation is to look at the very large motor, the very large heater that you've got, and say that's the bit that you're using most energy. But of course, you don't need to forget the time element here. And actually, a small power consumer being left on continually can have a much larger energy consumption than a large motor that's only used 3 hours a year. So you need to monitor, you need to measure, you need to conduct an energy audit where you ask those critical things that we'll talk about in the next slide to find those opportunities, to quantify what the savings might be, and to give us an idea what those paybacks might be. And so, yeah, critically, what, where, when, why, those are the questions that you need to be asking yourself about every bit of energy consumed on your site. And then how can we reduce it? Do we need to not do it? Do we need to do things differently? Do we need to replace the systems? And of course, if this starts to feel outside of your skill set, if this starts to feel something that you're uncomfortable with, then there are many experts out there, including from NFU Energy, that can help you to understand your needs, understand the energy consumptions that you're using, and to recommend what things you might do to proactively change that. One of those areas that we do quite a lot of advice on is our GrowSave project. GrowSave was a project set up for horticulture specifically to provide help and advice about reducing energy consumption in protected cropping. And there's a wealth of information, a lot of technical information, a lot of hints and tips that you can go and download or read out on screen to help you pinpoint and where you might reduce your energy consumption, all the way from measuring and monitoring through to sort of really complicated climate control techniques. So growsave.co.uk, it's a free resource to anybody that wants to access it. And whilst it's focused on protected cropping, it can help all sections of agriculture as well. A lot of these things aren't unique to protected cropping. You know, people use boilers, people have irrigation systems, use pumps, use motors, use drives, have heating systems in all areas of agriculture, not just in protected cropping. Once we've moved on from energy efficiency, then yeah, renewable energy solutions should become our next question. You know, what can we self-generate? How can we maybe invest in equipment that can reduce our reliance on purchased energy from the grid or from the gas network? And here are some sort of very popular systems: your biomass boiler, your AD plant. The one in the middle is meant to be a picture of a borehole for a ground source heat pump. People are talking more and more about battery storage. And maybe there's going to be an emergence of wind power onshore, even though sort of offshore wind farms have been installed quite a lot over the last few years. People like to maintain control, and onshore wind would be a way of filling the gap where sort of solar PV sort of loses out in the winter months. Talking about solar PV, yeah, the runaway success really. The solar, as I mentioned at the beginning, has reduced from sort of £6,000 a kilowatt when I started in 2005 to maybe £600 or £700 a kilowatt in terms of cost to install today. And therefore, it's no surprise that it has been that sort of runaway success that has allowed people to invest in very large energy schemes that not just provide energy to their own businesses, but also provides energy to the national grid to support them throughout the summer months. Doesn't do everything, of course. It only delivers when the sun's shining, so it's not very good at night time. And clearly during the winter months, when there's even less light around, then its production capabilities are compromised. And then we need to start thinking about how we might sort of substitute our PV generated electricity with something else that we might generate. And that's where onshore wind turbines may be able to fill a gap for some people. Talking about heat, the runaway success in terms of renewable heating systems has been biomass, sort of popularized by the renewable heat incentive, and many installations, maybe tens of thousands of installations were done, a lot of them on farm, over the sort of the 2010 to sort of 2019, 2020 period. So a lot of wood chip boilers, a lot of wood pellet boilers, a good number of log boilers as well, where heating is required, especially in poultry units and protected cropping. These really were a really good option for reducing the reliance on purchased oils or gas in some cases. And yeah, they're still a good technology. They're still a good technique to help you to sort of decarbonize and also take some control of your energy costs as well. There aren't, sorry, the incentive scheme, renewable heat incentive scheme has ended. There isn't a support mechanism for biomass as it stands. There is one for biomethane called the Green Gas Support Scheme for large biomethane to grid plant. But really, if you're thinking about some form of small-scale heating system, then your clean heat grant is probably about the only support mechanism there is at this moment in time. However, a lot of biomass systems will work without a subsidy, will work without an incentive to help them install, because especially wood chip, the cost of that hasn't gone up anywhere near as dramatically as the cost of some of the other purchased in energies. Heat pumps, yeah, heat pumps are one of those technologies that the government would love to see more installations of. You know, multiples of tens of thousands a year installations over the next 10 years is their target. And they work by using energy that is sort of all around us, either in the ground or in the air or in water sources, and transfer that to a useful temperature that we can then heat our properties, our businesses, our processes, without relying on burning things. The fact of the matter is that they still require electricity to drive them, and at this moment in time, when electricity is 3 or 4 times the cost of gas, there isn't a huge financial incentive to install a heat pump-based system, even though in terms of carbon, they are a considerably good carbon reduction measure. Because you're using a lot less electricity to give you that number of heat units. So maybe 1 unit of electricity in gives you 4 units of heat out. So they're a very good decarbonization technology, but not necessarily a very good economic measure as it stands at the moment. And yeah, here at the NFU and NFU Energy, we've been talking for many years and sort of lobbying hard to try and reduce the costs of electricity for running heating-based systems or transport systems, so that they become more attractive and become more of a legitimate option for reducing people's energy costs as well as reducing people's carbon footprint. Yeah, just an example of how that might work. Yeah, just taking protected cropping as an example here. Here we have maybe a normal crop grown with 400 kilowatt hours per square meter of heat and 20 kilowatt hours of square meter of electricity, or in terms of a lit crop, maybe sort of double that in terms of heat, but quite a considerably more, sort of 10 or a little 11 times more electricity. It's leaving us with quite a big energy consumption. Yeah, 8,300 megawatt hours worth of energy required for a couple of hectares of normal crop and 14,000 for a lit crop. If we're going to do that conventionally, then we might use a gas boiler, or we might use some combined heat and power systems for our lit crop, where we're getting both electricity and heat. And you can see some considerable energy consumptions there, even though we're using 8,300 megawatt hours for our normal crop. We're, at least we're going to have to put in 9,500 megawatt hours in our gas boiler in order to keep that crop warm, or maybe a little bit more than that in our combined heat and power system. How does that compare in terms of decarbonizations then? So our carbon emissions, yeah, here we have our 2 crops, our lit crop in blue, our unlit crop in orange, and we can see that right at this moment in time, a gas boiler and mains electricity is slightly more carbon intensive than our combined heat and power system, as we're getting sort of that benefit of efficiency by using CHP to both provide us the energy we require and also reduce our carbon emissions for keeping that glasshouse warm. But of course, that balance will change as our grid decarbonizations take over. And we found, or if we look at the track that we're currently on, we're probably going to be decarbonizing our electricity network considerably faster than we'll decarbonize our gas network. And therefore, the balance will shift over time. And so here we have this sort of the same result, looking at the various different energy sources that we might have in terms of how much carbon they might emit. And yeah, in sort of 2050. And in 2050, maybe we're using a mains gas boiler and mains gas and mains electricity. It suddenly becomes considerably less carbon intensive than using our CHP. But if you look at some of the other renewables technologies, no surprise there, a heat pump or biomass has well, a tenth of the carbon emissions that we might have from even our gas boiler and our mains electricity. And so, yeah, we can affect our decarbonizations much more rapidly, much more straightforwardly by moving to a renewable energy source than thinking around the edges of efficiency in a lot of ways, especially as our decarbonizations on the mains electricity network take hold. It would be remiss of me not to talk about anaerobic digestion, AD. This is a means by which we are going to decarbonize our gas network, probably not in very considerable quantities, but it does have the ability to put green gas into the network and to reduce our carbon emissions as a result. And biomethane to grid being sort of popularized by the Green Gas Support Scheme as it stands. And previous to that, the Renewable Heat Incentive will be having an impact. And clearly we can be using on-farm wastes or on-farm residues or even on-farm crops to turn into gas to both sell for a profit and also to help that decarbonisation that we would really like to see. So a wrinkle to that as we go forward, of course, is that in the future, we might be able to capture those CO2 emissions. In fact, the technology is available now. It's the cost of the technology that really holds people back. But if we can capture the CO2 emissions from the AD plant as well as putting green gas into the network, we can actually sort of sequester that carbon and turn it into a carbon negative emissions technology. And of course, if we can put that into transport fuel as well, then maybe we can help the electrified transport requirement out too. Yeah, again, it would be remiss of me not to talk about battery storage. Yeah, battery storage isn't a renewable technology in itself, but it is a way of helping us get better benefit from the renewable technologies that we put in. And the costs of this have been coming down rapidly. I wouldn't say in quite the speed that the cost of PV came down is sort of in the mid 2015s. But battery technology is getting ever cheaper as we sort of invest in research and development to improve the mobile battery technologies for cars and for buses and for trucks and that sort of thing. We're going to benefit from that in static applications as well. And therefore we can couple our batteries to our renewable technology, maybe buffer our nighttime non-production of PV by storing it during the day and using it at night. The chances are electrical storage batteries aren't going to give us interseasonal storage. We're going to need to find other techniques for that. But if we can at least buffer our nighttime consumption, we're making some strides towards keeping ourselves decarbonised all day long, if we can't even keep ourselves decarbonised all season long. And of course, there are opportunities as well to host utility scale schemes as people look to help the grid out in terms of that fast response for being able to buffer the big changes in the network as large renewables installations come on and offline. Again, talking about onshore wind, this is an area that there's a lot of talk about at this moment in time, and talk about sort of relaxing some of the regulations, especially around the planning regime, and that'd be very welcomed by a lot of people in agriculture. Yeah, the jury is still out, and we shall see as the years go by as to how effective that relaxing of those regulations has been. But yes, clearly it would provide a bit of a seasonal buffer to maybe PV in terms of being able to produce during the winter when other things aren't. If you're interested in any of these technologies, then do come and talk to us. We have a renewable energy solutions product where we will try and partner you up with a reputable supplier for some of these equipment and technologies, and sort of try and help you through the decision-making process so that you're making the right decision for your business and for you personally. So yeah, do come and talk to us. Yeah, we will, as I say, we'll have that conversation. We'll put you through to an installer. We can even help you out with trying to find some finance if that's required. And of course, throughout the implementation phase, we'll be on hand to answer any questions that you might have and make sure that the installation is going in the way that you would expect. The one thing I would say is that, as you might expect, because of the way energy prices have been over the last few months, there's been a real demand on this service, and a lot of the installers, especially the reputable ones, are really flat out busy in trying to make all these installations happen. So it might not be as quick as it would have been sort of 12, 18 months or so ago, but please do come and talk to us. A little plug also for our EnviroCrops app. For those of you interested in growing miscanthus or short rotation coppice willow or other forms of biomass-based cropping, we have a decision-making tool that will help you give you the facts and figures about where you might make investments and the sort of returns on those investments that you might have. This is a DEFRA-funded project with Crops for Energy, AFBI and Calvium and ourselves, and we are currently sort of in year one of that project. Please do sort of navigate to that envirocrops.com website to find out more about that and to find out all the hard work that people are putting into making a really robust decision-making system for agricultural holdings owners. Good. Okay. Just rapidly coming towards the end of my time here. So maybe a quick sum up slide. Yeah. What actions should you take right now? I guess my theme has been laboured on energy efficiency, and I think that really is what people should concentrate on. Anyone that uses energy should concentrate on how they're using it, why they're using it, and how they might reduce that consumption first before you think about things like alternative energy sources or making large investments for the future. So yeah, I'll leave you with what we might call a virtuous circle. Reuse our own resources, reduce our consumption, then invest in renewable energy, and then have another go around it and see what you can do to be more effective and to reduce your energy costs on your own business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was really, really interesting. I'm sure everybody who joined us this afternoon agreed as well. It was really superb. Just to let everybody know that this session will be available on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So watch out for a tweet from us on that one. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Emily in particular at Global Farm Pioneers for hosting this session for us. And now, John, if you're agreeable, we've just got a couple of questions for you. I hope that's okay, if you don't mind us putting some of those to you. So in no particular order, John, how could a farmer measure and monitor energy effectively, and not just their energy consumption, but how that energy is used to produce food? So for example, the amount of energy per ton of grain.
Yeah, I suppose you've given a hint to the actual answer to that question in asking it, but the starting place is to measure what you're currently consuming. So a really good energy monitor, one that you can move around, usually a sort of clip-on current transformer type, will give you some really good insight into pieces of equipment, especially electrically driven pieces of equipment. Measuring heating fuels isn't quite as straightforward. If you've got a gas burner that's drying your ton of grain, for example, then you're going to need a gas safe engineer to put a gas meter in line, or maybe the on-farm gas meter is the only thing that supplies, in which case you've got that tool already in place. But dipsticks and sight glasses and various other ways of measuring tank fuel are also invaluable in terms of giving you some data. But as you quite rightly say, having that energy consumption is useless unless you actually put it against what you're using that energy for. So benchmarking that it becomes the next step to use that energy data for. So yeah, by day, by week, by month, by ton of grain, by number of chickens, by area of glass house, whatever your measure is, whatever your business is using energy for, that should be the measure that you're using. And really, it's sort of the output that you're after. It's what you're selling out, or it's what you're actually physically drying, or it's what you're physically producing that really is the important thing to measure against. But yeah, you're not just going to get one number and think, yeah, that's the answer. You need to then start comparing to other people, comparing to yourself, comparing to other periods, last year, last week, last month. Otherwise, you've got no real idea as to whether you're being more or less efficient. If you have only got one answer, then that's great. You're going to be able to use that answer in the future. Yeah, then make some changes, then measure again, and then you've got the comparison to say, have I made a difference, and has that difference been positive or negative, and does that give me the confidence to do something else again?
Thank you, John. I'm sure everybody on this webinar will be interested in what you'd reference with regards to onshore wind and a potential relaxation of policy around this. And I just wondered if you could perhaps say a little bit more about that, and appreciating that that there'll only be a certain amount that you are able to say. But what is there anything more you can tell us, John, about onshore wind and which the direction of travel is there?
Yeah, I think as the NFU, and supported by NFU Energy, we're lobbying hard for the relaxation of those rules. They're, in effect, the ban was a de facto ban in that it made the planning process so heavy that people just didn't want to pursue the installation of a turbine. That rule has been slightly relaxed, and we're lobbying for that to be relaxed further still. I think as people wake up to, and when I say people, I mean policymakers, decision makers, government, as they wake up to the fact that we still need to fill that hungry gap, if I call it that, in terms of our energy production throughout the winter months. There aren't many other technologies that can do that. And we've got to appreciate that the wind doesn't always blow, but the chances of the wind blowing are much higher than the sun shining in the middle of December. And from that point of view, I can see the direction of travel is positive. I don't think it's going to be very quick. I'm not going to say that you're going to be able to install a turbine next year, but over the next 3 or 4 years, I strongly believe that we will be in a really good position again with onshore wind, and the numbers of installations will be increasing.
Thank you, John. Really, really interesting. I'm sure we'll be watching with interest.
Me too.
On the topic of solar,
yeah,
we hear a lot from farmers that we speak to about the challenge of sending surplus back to the grid, and this seems to be quite a pervasive thing that you do hear banded around rather a lot. Do you have anything to say about that one, John? What would be your observations there, and what we might be able to hope for in the future?
Yeah, it is absolutely a really big challenge at all scales, not just very large utility scales installations, and not just limited to solar. Yeah, all technologies, all generation technologies trying to connect to the network are having difficulties at this moment in time. And that's because our network wasn't really designed to do what we're currently doing with it. It was designed around sort of small numbers of very large power stations distributing energy out to lots and lots of people. And what we've done is we've put in lots and lots of installations of very small power stations trying to distribute energy to lots and lots of other people. And trying to manage that with the technology that we have, with the aging infrastructure, with the equipment, with the safety and reliability that the grid must adhere to, is a problem. I guess my advice would be, don't just think that you're always going to be able to export your surplus to the network. Find ways of putting in a renewable energy system that matches your requirements, and maybe take advantage of some of the battery technology to make sure that it can supply even more for you, even during the times when the sun isn't shining quite as much. And use exporting to the grid as almost as a last resort. Yes, you can make some money by exporting the surplus, but it won't be anywhere near as cost effective as the energy that you'll save yourselves by not importing. So make the system appropriate for your needs. Always try to get a grid connection and get as large a grid connection as you possibly can for the installation that you have, but don't be surprised if you get knocked back, and don't be surprised if you have to put in what we might call a curtailment system or an export limiting system. That means that you're only able to export smaller amounts than maybe you can generate, or at a sort of a time limited on time of day limited basis. So there are some techniques you can use to get over that hurdle. But this situation is only going to get worse, as far as I can see, over the next few years, as more and more installations become online, and as the grid reinforcement catches up with where it needs to be.
Thank you. And it couldn't go unnoticed that in one of the earlier parts of your presentation, the reference to the reliance on electricity that's going to be coming. Clearly, electricity is going to be absolutely critical to all of our businesses and indeed our homes. And you know, the mind leaps quite quickly to what we've touched on some just around infrastructure and so on. And I just wonder if you might be able to share something with our guests here around the prognosis for the system. I ask because it's easy to imagine an overloaded network where there is a doubling of requirement from the infrastructure. Do you have anything to say about that, Jon?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge recognised at the highest level. And there are some really big solutions being proposed for overcoming our electricity reliance. You know, we've talked about cables, or we've heard about cables from Morocco into the Dorset coast. You know, moving electricity from places where the sun is shining to places where the sun isn't shining at any point in time, and electricity going in both directions, in fact. And those are some of the really big solutions to the really big challenges. Putting a ring main around the entirety of the UK might be another solution, whereby you're shipping the electricity around the circumference of the island rather than across the middle, where putting cables across the middle becomes a very emotive, a very challenging thing to do. But we still need to ship that electricity around from point to point. And to that end, we've got to be a little bit open-minded about this. NIMBYism is great when there are things that need protecting, but not everyone can be a NIMBY, because it's got to go somewhere. This infrastructure has to go somewhere. These installations have to go somewhere, and a shortage of energy really isn't a solution that anybody wants at this moment in time.
Of course. Jon, we're rapidly coming towards the end of our time here this afternoon, and we're very grateful to you for giving us your time for this session. But I did want to ask about your recommendations towards the end there of your presentation. So you did make reference to I think it was a 3 or possibly a 4-step process, which, at the risk of parroting back to you what you've already said, was around looking at energy efficiency as a recommendation, followed by using what we already have before looking at alternative energy. So, of course, a campaign to switch off is absolutely logical, and I'd hope that colleagues and farmers and otherwise would be instigating those types of campaigns, and if they're not, they certainly will be after today's session. But what would be the first alternative energy recommendation you would make once farmers have gone through the process of looking at what they have and how they can be more efficient?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about the first alternative, you're talking about the first renewable energy installation that you might consider. You cannot get more cost effective for pounds per kilowatt at this moment in time than a solar installation, depending, of course, on what you need. And if you're needing heating, then a biomass installation is probably your first port of call. Solar isn't going to get you your heating your poultry shed, for example. So yeah, biomass and solar are electrically and heat wise are probably the two alternative technologies that you should look at first of all, probably followed fairly closely by a heat pump, if that really can match your heat requirement, as in the terms of the temperature, and you've got the capacity on the electricity network to supply that that energy for your heating purposes. So yeah, there you go. There's three rather than one. But I guess my message here is really to reiterate, what do you need energy for? There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution here. The chances are we're going to have to mix and match different technologies to give us the right outcome. We might need a bit of battery storage. We might need some biomass heating. We might be able to exist with heat pumps. We might be able to exist with some solar panels, but we might have to put it all together to really tackle the energy requirement in a holistic sense. And until we measure and understand and truly know why and where and how we're using that energy, then jumping 2 feet first into a technology probably isn't the most advisable thing to do.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end, John. Thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you to everybody that's joined us. As I said, we'll make this session available on YouTube within the next couple of days. So thank you again, John, and thank you everybody for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next one, which will be on the 31st of July. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.